Hey there, friends! Right now, the biggest worry for the authorities in Bangladesh is the ongoing protests by textile workers. For the past 2 weeks, these protests have been shaking up national security and order quite a bit. The situation has gotten pretty intense, with protesters clashing with the police, and sadly, at least 3 workers have lost their lives in the process. Union leaders are saying that the police have been using tear gas and rubber bullets to try and control the crowds, which has only made things worse. Since the beginning of November, these dedicated workers in Bangladesh's textile factories have been standing up for better wages. This fight for fair pay is what's been driving the protests we're seeing now. Imagine working in factories that supply big brands like H&M, Zara, or Levi's, and only making about $95 a month. That's tough. The workers are out there demanding a raise to $208 a month, which still isn't a lot. Just to put it into perspective, that's less than what Americans earn in a week working for the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour before taxes. It's clear why they're fighting for change. Nazma Akhtar, who leads one of Bangladesh's largest unions, the Somalito Samiti Garment Workers Federation, has been very vocal about the unacceptable $95 monthly wage for textile workers. She believes that the wage board's recent announcement is nothing short of an insult to those in the garment industry. Nazma warns that if a fair minimum wage isn't set, it could lead to even more labor unrest, which nobody wants, not the workers, the employers, or the government. The protests have already had a significant impact, causing many factories to shut down. This has practically brought the world's second-largest garment manufacturing hub, right after China, to a standstill. Dozens of protesters have been injured and hospitalized, and tragically, at least 3 workers have died in these clashes over the past 2 weeks. It's important to remember that most of these factory workers come from very poor and vulnerable communities. All right, if you're new to this channel, Eagle Explorer warmly welcomes you. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and remember to turn on the notification bell to catch our upcoming content. Interestingly, Bangladesh hasn't seen protests this violent in about a decade, not since the Rana Plaza disaster. Back then, a 9-story building packed with garment factories collapsed, killing around 1,100 people, mostly women. While working conditions and wages have improved since that tragedy, the value of the garment industry has grown much faster than the benefits for its workers. To give you an idea of how crucial this industry is to Bangladesh, the production of ready-made garments makes up a whopping 35.1% of the country's annual GDP. The ongoing wage protests, involving more than 11,000 textile workers, have led to numerous factory closures. On November 11th, the authorities announced that 150 factories would be indefinitely closed. Then, on November 30th, a government-appointed board announced a 56.25% increase in the monthly minimum wage, raising it to 12,500 taka, which is roughly $113.80. However, workers find this raise insufficient, as it hasn't kept pace with inflation over the past 5 years. That's why they're demanding a minimum wage of 23,000 taka, which is over $200 a month. The police have also confirmed that 150 garment factories have been indefinitely closed. These closures are concentrated in the industrial towns of Ashulia and Ghazipur, just north of the capital, Dhaka. Factory owners are worried that the strikes will drag on for weeks if the wage issue isn't sorted out soon. Bangladesh is a giant in the textile export industry, with these exports making up a massive 85% of its annual export revenue, totaling around $55 billion. There are about 3,500 garment factories in the country, producing clothing for major global fashion brands like Zara, Levi's, Gap, and H&M. According to CNN, 18 major fashion brands including H&M, Levi's, Gap, and Puma have written to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, urging for peaceful negotiations and a new minimum wage that meets workers' basic needs. The American Apparel and Footwear Association, AAFA, which represents brands in the U.S., has also called for a timely reconsideration of the minimum wage. Currently in Bangladesh, the minimum wage is reviewed every 5 years. Nate Herman, Senior Vice President of Policy at the AAFA, has voiced opposition to this 5-year review cycle for wage increases in Bangladesh. Herman believes that the minimum wage should ideally be reviewed every year, not every 5 years. It's important to note that brands like H&M don't actually own any factories in Bangladesh. Instead, they contract with local factory owners who cover all the upfront costs, including materials, facilities, and labor. In a recent statement, H&M acknowledged their crucial role in ensuring living wage payments for workers through more responsible purchasing practices. H&M mentioned that despite some partner factories shutting down, they hadn't noticed any major impact on overall production or their supply chain due to the protests. Industrial Global Union, an international organization representing garment workers, has sought clarification on H&M's role in facilitating living wages, but they have not yet received a response. On the other hand, Levi's has urged the Bangladeshi government to establish a fair, reliable, and transparent process for regularly setting minimum wages. While brands don't have the authority to set wages in Bangladesh, they do have significant influence through pricing pressure. CNN reached out to the Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association, which represents factory owners, for comment, but did not get a response. According to World Bank statistics from 2019, garment exports made up 84% of Bangladesh's total export revenue. This industry is the cornerstone of the country's economy. However, for the fashion industry to grow sustainably and avoid violent protests like the current ones, the Bangladeshi authorities need to develop a more reasonable, non-violent, and comprehensive process. Moreover, global fashion consumption habits will also play a role in changing the fashion production operations in Bangladesh. Almost all consumers buying clothes produced in Bangladesh are from overseas markets. Many of these consumers demand fast and cheap fashion, especially during times of inflation. Spending habits are shifting towards more affordable goods, which creates a favorable condition for the fast fashion industry to thrive in Bangladesh. This is why brands like Zara and H&M have seen significant growth. However, the fast fashion production process forces workers to work longer hours without fair compensation. Recently, a portion of the younger generation of consumers has started caring more about sustainable fashion. They are thinking about where their clothes come from, how they are made, and how many hours workers spend making a shirt or a pair of pants. They wonder, with the selling price of a fashion item, what kind of wages are the textile workers getting? This growing consumer awareness is helping to drive changes in fashion production in Bangladesh. Jason Judd, the director of the Global Labor Institute at Cornell University, emphasized that customers need to be a major force in encouraging brands to create change. During the pandemic, brands canceled $40 billion worth of orders at factories worldwide, leaving factory owners and suppliers to bear the costs and workers unpaid. However, thanks to the Pay Up campaign on social media, brands ended up paying back $22 billion of the $40 billion owed. Judd pointed out that real change comes from policy and action within the country itself. The situation in Bangladesh today is reminiscent of Cambodia in 2014, when garment workers demanded higher wages after the government set a new minimum wage. As a result, after the reforms, Cambodia now increases the minimum wage for workers annually. Judd concluded that Bangladesh needs a more reasonable, nonviolent, and comprehensive process to end the current tense and violent protests. And that wraps up our international news summary for today. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye. And we look forward to seeing you in future news broadcasts.